The thing I knew about you before you even ran for president was, first, you had written a Wall Street Journal article, co-authored an op-ed, arguing that this censorship regime where the government pressures big tech to control online speech is unconstitutional. I think it proved very prescient, given the court rulings we've had saying that. You then wrote a book, Woke Inc., where you advanced even further, more passionately, this defense of free speech, both online in terms of our political culture. And then you wrote a op-ed in the Wall Street Journal at the start of the Hamas-Israel war saying we're not going to defeat Hamas through cancel culture. Since October 7th, we've had this kind of spate of censorship, state censorship in the West, and then kind of informal cancel culture. Lots of people have been fired, some for excessively supporting Israel, but mostly for people who have criticized Israel excessively. What is your view of free speech issues like this in terms of the role that it'll play in the Republican primary?
Look, the role it'll play in the Republican primary, I mean, that's for political analysts, Glenn. But my job in this is I'm a candidate. I'm going to share my convictions. And I think I'm the only candidate in this field that is a true free speech advocate to the core. I object to governmental backdoor intrusions into free speech, and most of this was coming from the left at the time that I wrote Woke Inc. and that first op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that you referenced. It came at some great personal sacrifice. After that very first piece I wrote, Glenn, 2 advisors to my company, and I was still a CEO of a biotech company at this time, 2 prominent advisors to my company resigned for making this argument defending free speech in the aftermath of January 6, 2021. And so I have been a crusader against left-wing cancel culture and remain so today. But I apply that principle 360 degrees. I don't care if you agree with me or not. You have the right to say it. And I believe much of our Republican primary voter base cares about that deeply, but it's going to take somebody who's willing to explain that to them, which I think the other candidates are not. And I am, because you know what? If the government can decide what speech can and cannot be expressed, there's no point in going through the rest of the motions. We're done as a country. The United States of America might be a mass of land, but the identity of the nation is gone if the government or the party in power can use force, directly or indirectly, to silence its political opponents. And I also worry, Glenn, that that's also the path that leads us, dare I say it, to violence, actually. I mean, if you tell people they can't speak, that's when they scream. If you tell people they can't scream, that's when they tear things down. And so history teaches us this is not a road we want to go down. People will ask now in the wake of a lot of the anti-Semitism, which I think is wrong in the United States, and I've condemned it. What do you do then? And how do you draw the line between free speech and this kind of speech that borders on inciting violence? Here's the answer. If you are expressing an opinion, no matter how heinous that opinion, it's protected. So telling somebody, hey, go down the street and stab that individual, that's not protected speech. That's directly inciting violence in a clear and present sense of that word. That's not the expression of an opinion. If I sell you, I don't know, a bottle of water, but it contains poison inside of it, but I say, hey, it's just a bottle of water, that's not protected speech. That's commercial speech. It's not expressing an opinion. But if you're expressing a true opinion, no matter how heinous that opinion, that is free to go in the United States of America. That's what the First Amendment protects. And that's what I'm going to protect. I mean, give me liberty or give me death. I mean that literally. I will protect this one to the very end. And I could lose some election. I don't care. I will stand for our right to express our opinions. My sense is that could be a winning political strategy, Glenn, but that's not what guiding me to say it.
Absolutely. And when I asked you what role will it play in the primary, I didn't really mean to imply that this was an opportunistic strategy, because I know it's not for you, since you've been saying it for a lot longer before you were a presidential candidate. What I meant was, one of the things that distinguishes your campaign is that you spend most of your time talking to voters, including going to a lot of places most Republican politicians don't, as opposed to in back rooms raising money from GOP big donors. In the process of doing that, have you heard from voters, from people, that this is a concern of theirs, that they seem to be losing their core liberty because of this censorship regime imposed on the internet?
Well, I'll tell you a mix, actually. So there's a selection bias, certainly, of people who come to my events, which include a lot of free speech advocates, many of whom have not been traditional Republican partisans, by the way, or people who have voted in the Iowa caucus. We're bringing in new people. Which, as a side note, Glenn, if we get them actually to come on January 15th, I think we're going to shatter the expectations in the polls, because these people aren't polled. But put that to one side. I'll be honest with you, what I see with the traditional Republican base right now is they're looking for leadership on this issue. Many of them do see pro-Hamas college students or people marching on the bridge of Manhattan Bridge or Brooklyn Bridge in New York. and wondering, hey, what the heck is going on? This is wrong. And many of them, when Ron DeSantis says he wants to disband Students for Justice in Palestine on campuses, or Nikki Haley saying similar things, kind of come around to being like, okay, well, yeah, we need to go after these bad guys. And I think it's going to take a leader to be able to say, hey, what they're saying is heinous. I will call that out. It's offensive. It offends the conscience in many cases. But it's an opinion. And if you say that now, that you want the government being able to silence them, let me explain to you what that means. If you question a vaccine, that means you're going to be a bioterrorist. If you label a student who tweets supporting terrorism, which is effectively what DeSantis is doing, then that means that if you're tweeting questioning the efficacy of a vaccine, they're going to label you a bioterrorist. Or if you question what's being taught in a school, you're going to be called a domestic terrorist. That's happening in school, parents who attend school board meetings already. Or if you say that someone who protested at the Capitol peacefully on January 6th, and you say they shouldn't be locked up, maybe you're an insurrectionist, then it really lands, I think, with the voter base and says, okay, no, I don't want that. Actually, I know that you told me that that speech was bad, but now that you explained it to me, I get that it's bad, but it shouldn't be censored. We do live in a moment, Glenn, where people need to be led. And I think part of what goes on in partisan politics today is you have a lot of poll testing going on. People test something in the polls. If it's going to go well, they're just going to spout that back out to the people. There's an old Thomas Sowell expression which goes, if you care about somebody, you tell them the truth. If you care about yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. I think you have a lot of politicians now doing the polling on this in the Republican primary and giving them what they want to hear. In my candidacy, one of the things that you've seen is, at the time that I adopted many of my positions, they weren't necessarily popular at that time. Some of them have come around to becoming the mainstream Republican political view. And so my hope is this defense of free speech that I'm offering in this primary will age well, but it's not necessarily where many traditional GOP primary voters are right now. Once I explain it to them, they are, but that requires me reaching a lot of people to do it. That's the honest answer.
So in the several other times that we've spoken, we've talked about both the Ukraine and U.S. policy toward Israel. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I only ask you I only want to ask one question about that because I have several other things I want to ask you about. Sure. But I do want to ask you this because you have made some of the most pro-Israel statements in terms of Israel's right to react to the October 7th massacre in the ways that it decides it wants to do. But there's a separate question of whether the U.S. should be financing Israel's wars, should be transferring billions of dollars in money. Joe Biden just asked for another $14 billion to give to Israel. When we talked about Ukraine in the past, you said, look, we have too many problems at home. We can't afford to be financing a bunch of wars, including foreign nations' wars. Does that rationale apply to Biden's request for $14 billion, and it'll be a lot more when all is said and done, to Israel, or is there something different about Israel that makes that rationale inapplicable?
I'm against that funding request, and I have been clear about this. The $61 billion to Ukraine, the 14 to 16, depending on the spending request for this specific war in Israel. I've made the case, actually, Glenn, that I don't think that's in the U.S. interest, and I don't think it's in Israel's interest. But either way, my rule of thumb across the board is any new elective foreign aid, we shouldn't be giving it as a country to anybody whose national debt per capita, per person, is less than the United States. Now, I also go further and say that this is also consistent with Israel's own founding vision. David Ben-Gurion, the founder of Israel, famously said, effectively in his own way, we don't want to depend on the fleeting sympathies of America or the UN or the West or anybody else. Israel has an absolute right to its own national self-defense. And I stand by that, but I stand by that by saying that we're best off, and I believe Israel's best off, when we're not intervening, when we're not armchair quarterbacking what they do. We muddy the waters with U.S. involvement in this specific war. So that's where I land on that, is I think that's better for the U.S. and better for Israel.
And I should say there are a lot of very vehement pro-Israel supporters in the United States, including several who've been on our show, who have called for an end to U.S. aid to Israel precisely because they believe it hamstrings Israel, it places limits on what they can do. All right, let's move to something else, which is the newly elected Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, made good on one of his promises that he made when elected, which was to release all videos the January 6th riot that happened at the Capitol in 2021. It is shocking, I think, that it took 2 years for the public to see all videos as opposed to the videos handpicked for us by Adam Schiff and Liz Cheney. But now we finally have them. There have been a lot of videos that we've covered on our show that I think are very illuminating. What do you make of these new videos, and what is your view now on January 6th looking back?
Look, it shocks the conscience. The fact that you have police escorting people in, that's a form of entrapment, I would say. Somebody escorting you in as though they're actually rolling out the red carpet for you in some of those videos. And then some of those same people have been prosecuted as domestic terrorists effectively in the treatment the court system has given them. That's wrong. That's not the United States of America. And Glenn, for me, this is a part of a continuing and deeply concerning pattern, frankly, over the last 20 years of the national security establishment, Republicans and Democrats alike, in many cases, Republicans more than Democrats, exploiting those laws to completely disrespect the constitutional rights of individuals. I mean, the same government, and this is, long past, but the same government that we know lied to us in the aftermath of even something terrible that happened to this country, horrific, in the wake of 9/11. They said that, Saudi Arabia had nothing to do with it. And then now we know that Omar al-Bayoumi, the 42-year-old graduate student who welcomed people in LAX airport, absolutely was a Saudi intelligence operative. Our own government declassified that 20 years later. So it's this bad habit where they use the act to effectuate an agenda that otherwise should shock the constitutional conscience. But then when the fervor has died down, quietly release what the actual facts are to say that they were transparent. The people deserve the truth, the whole truth, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. And the fact that this took 2 years to come out, I think explains a lot of why they suppressed this video footage. There's stuff in there that I'm sure the government did not want us to see when the Biden administration led a post-9/11-like, Patriot Act-like scourge of Americans across this country, concerned Americans. That's wrong. The wave of domestic terrorism, calling white nationalism the greatest threat that we face in the United States. And then really, I would say, offending the Constitution at various steps of the way to go after people who have not been granted their constitutional rights to due process in many of those prosecutions or those plea deals that have been extracted. That's wrong. So one of the things I've said is a president rarely gets an opportunity to go back and change the past. You can only change the future. But one way a president can do it is through the pardon power. And so I have a list of day one pardons I'm committed to, Glenn. Anybody who was a peaceful protester on January 6th, day one pardon. Anybody who had their due process rights denied, including Brady Rule violations or otherwise, day one pardon. And I put others on this list too. I mean, put Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, not quite a pardon, but a form of clemency. I would say the same because he wasn't prosecuted, but the same idea to Russ Ulbricht, to be able to go to Donald Trump, even somebody who was, I believe, now the victim of politically motivated persecutions through prosecution. It's interesting that I am the only Republican candidate in this field that's actually been able to say these things, certainly on that debate stage. And the question, again, that begs is why, Glenn? And it's because the puppet masters in the Republican Party establishment do not approve of this message. Ronna McDaniel, the chairwoman, failed chairwoman, I should say, of the RNC for her failed track record over the last 5 years. After that last debate, that third debate, which I don't know if you saw that or not, but that was somebody who said, I would not get another cent of funding from the RNC, almost proving my point about that corruption. The thing, and it's sad, the sad reality is the only reason I'm able to do this is because I can self-finance this campaign with, 150,000 some odd small dollar donors that are lifting this up. But it takes a guy who has lived the American dream, achieved financial success at pretty much the highest level, to be able to declare independence from that establishment. That's not how the system is supposed to work, but it's the reality of the system as it exists today. And so, yeah, a lot of what I'm saying, I'm the only candidate saying it because the Republican establishment doesn't approve of it. But that gives me a special sense of purpose to double down and keep doing it.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.